This episode is sponsored by FX's Kindred, the original series only on Hulu. Based on Octavia E. Butler's best-selling novel, FX's Kindred centers on Dana James, a young Black woman and aspiring writer. Dana begins to settle into her new home in Los Angeles and is violently pulled back and forth in time. She emerges at a 19th century plantation and is confronted with secrets she never knew ran through her blood. FX's Kindred, all episodes now streaming only on Hulu.
From Sugar 23, I'm Angela Ledgerwood, and this is Lit Up. Jen Ortiz is my guest today, and she is the deputy editor of New York Magazine's The Cut, known for its voicey, sometimes snarky, but very, very clever stories. And yes, she is going to share some of the stories behind the infamous Meghan Markle cover story. Now, before she worked at New York Magazine, she was the deputy editor at Cosmopolitan, and we both share having worked there, which was great to talk about. We are going to chat about the elusive behind-the-scenes role of an editor and what she looks for in the writers that she works with and their stories. In our conversation, Jen reveals one of her secret obsessions, which happens to be watching cooking videos on YouTube. And she highlights one particular guy, a Welshman, a vegan chef called Gaz Oakley, who now I am similarly obsessed with. I hope you love this episode. I think you'll hear how great Jen is and be asking her to be a return guest on the show. I want to share with everyone that this is Jen's first time on a podcast.
Yes, go easy on me.
I think you're already going to be great. I can tell.
I'm clutching the chair.
Such a good laugh that will resonate over the airwaves. But I want to ask you so much about your entire life, career, and we'll go all over the place.
Sure.
But there's something so specific about The Cut, and it's that voice. Mm-hmm. It's that... I like to think of it as the best friend kind of know-it-all who actually does know it all. Mm-hmm. And like sometimes you're like, really? Don't be harsh. But then everything they say ends up being true.
Right.
I'm wondering like internally what words do you put to that voice and how do you help shape that for the readers but also for the writers that you edit?
Sure. We're big on writing the way we speak. So it should sound like your friend. It should sound like your group chat, like, happy hour with your friends out. We want it to sound conversational while still smart and sharp and, when it's appropriate, humor and a little bite. When it's not appropriate, a serious, non-condescending tone. Yeah, I guess in terms of what we tell writers, I think the Cut voice if you're pitching a story to the Cut and we're working together. And so that you could be a little voicey. We're usually not going to tone you down. We're going to try to get that a little bit more amplified in a piece and that you can have a little bit of attitude. We're not gratuitously mean or sort of biting just for the sake of it, but the writing on the Cut should have a point of view and that should come through and that's going to come through the voice.
So I have to ask about the article that everyone read, the cover story with Meghan Markle.
Which one could that be?
And my thing is let's just get it out there now because there's so many other great pieces and you have written and edit, a lot of the more serious pieces. But let's go back to Meghan. How involved were you in that piece and what were some of the discussions you can share about sharing her story?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I sort of had side saddle on that piece is maybe how I would describe it. So our editor-in-chief, Lindsay, who can just make miracles happen, made this happen and was in touch with Meghan's team for a long time and, got this huge idea to become reality. And so we talked about it a lot during that sort of ideation process and the idea that this might be and who would be good to write it and what are the things we'd want covered and that sort of, pre-assignment thinking. And then our features director at New York Magazine, Genevieve, who is the sort of like editor you dream to work with and learn from, was the main editor on the piece. And she edits Allison Davis, who wrote it, also amazing. And they were primarily the ones working on that piece. But then Lindsay had me do some top reads later on in the process and give my opinion on what was in there, any thoughts on what I would change around, anything that we felt it was missing, etc. But it was amazing to see come together and still sort of unbelievable that it happened.
When I read it, I'm like, there's the weird pause because I'm like, that article, ooh. I'm just shocked that Meghan said, like, the quotes are real. Mm-hmm. And so, like, what a gift for a writer. But also trying to piece together someone's reality that has become so strange.
Right.
But her story is that she's so down to earth. Mm-hmm. And it just felt like her own quotes showed quite a different story.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, Allison is very good at pulling those sorts of moments out of people. I mean, it can be very uncomfortable to be interviewed. You're very aware of the fact that you're being interviewed. There is a recorder on the table. If the journalist has a notebook in their hand, you know that they're there to do a job, and you're sort of unnerved by that as a subject. And Allison is really good at sort of removing all of that and really letting the subject feel really present and comfortable and able to open up and let the guard down. And I think that's what happened in that interview. And, I can't imagine a person with more reason to have a guard up than Meghan. And Allison was able to, help chip away at that and make her feel comfortable enough to really open up and show a lot of her life. I mean, to get to go to after school pickup, that just feels like a moment you can't even wish for as an editor, as a reader, as a writer to happen, because it would seem so impossible. And, it was possible.
Absolutely. I'd love to know more about your journey as an editor because, from the outside, like so many things, it's a dream job. And I think it's actually a dream job from inside the job, from what it sounds like. But, what was that journey for you? Was writing always something that you were drawn to?
It was, and it sort of wasn't. So in college, I went to Yale, where there was not a journalism major. And unless your chosen career path was going to be more school, some sort of grad school track, or finance or law or medicine, there wasn't a ton of or at least I didn't feel there was a ton of creative guidance for what you might want to do. And so I thought I wanted to work in media, and I did, but I didn't really know how to do it or what would sort of be the next step. And I worked on some college magazine, and I interned a little bit at a small, very, very small, too small to mention publication. So when I graduated, I was sort of lost and didn't really know what the next step would be. And it was 2008, and the economy collapsed all around me. And I was very lucky to be from New York City. And so I was back here with my parents looking for a job. And I landed in PR and worked in a small public relations firm for a few years, thinking, well, this was another side of media I thought would be sort of fun and cool and glamorous, in that sort of running around all the time in a chicken with your head cut off sort of way. I'd watched the MTV show Power Girls, I think it was called, and thought it was wow, how cool. It was not so cool. And it was very hard work for very little payoff and very little satisfaction for me. It's, other people have a different experience, but I learned pretty soon on, even though I stayed there, that I was kind of on the wrong side of those phone calls, of the pitch calls that I was making. And it wasn't until a friend said, sort of casually and randomly, it was I'm sure I was complaining about work for the umpteenth time. She's like, why don't you go to journalism school? There are a lot of people at my job who went, and she was working on the business side of Business Insider at the time. I was like, it was sort of right there in front of me the whole time, and I hadn't considered it. And it's yeah, that's a good idea. And I think really the next day I like looked up the application deadlines for NYU and I was like, okay, I have a week. I think maybe I had 2 weeks. I had to get like sort of special permission to submit my GRE scores late because I wasn't going to take it in the next few weeks. I didn't have one like scheduled. But yeah, it was really that time at NYU. I did a 1.5 year long program that was then called the magazine writing program. I think now it's like magazine and digital writing or something like that. And it was both a break from working, like, again, very lucky to get to live with my parents at the time and just really focus on like learning this craft that I was really interested in, but hadn't had the time to commit that kind of practice and thinking about and studying it. And then it was very, very soon into the first semester that I was like, oh, this was it. Like, I had never had that feeling of like, I'm at the place I'm supposed to be. This is the thing I should be doing. And that was it. And even then, I don't think I knew that editor was going to be the, place where I'd end up. I think everyone goes to a grad program like that thinking they're going to be the next big magazine writer, or at least hoping to be. And so writing was the thing that I was, had at my finish line. But I think the experience of working after that program, and maybe even when I was interning, but I think it was when I was properly on staff somewhere that it was like, oh, editing doesn't mean you don't write. You're just not, your byline's not on it, but you're helping craft the story and you're doing all the things that you like about writing without the blank page at the beginning, which is really nice.
Well, going back to that first PR job, you were pitching and you said that you wanted to be on the other side of those phone calls. What did you learn about pitching? Like what worked and what do you look for in a succinct pitch now?
Well, pitching as a publicist, I was terrible at, I will say. I have a very clear memory of calling, I don't remember who it was, but someone at the Wall Street Journal, and my pitch was just terrible. It was a private jet company, and they were really pushing us on the idea of pushing out the narrative that, oh, actually, if you charter a flight with a few other people, it's flying green because you're not flying by yourself.
Oh my God.
It's like, oh, have you heard of a commercial flight? What are you talking about? And I was, sort of like nervously stumbling out this pitch to, whatever poor soul answered my call. And it was just click, like not even a no thanks, goodbye. So I don't know that I learned what not to do.
Maybe it sounds like the lesson too is that if you didn't believe what you were pitching, it was very hard for you to pitch. And I think I would be the same. But I think other people can take,
totally
dried beans and be like, these
totally,
and like it's a talent.
Totally. I think what it did teach me that I then carried on is sort of I could just like click into a certain mode. Like we had to work a lot of events. It was a small PR firm that did restaurants, events in the Hamptons, which like ruined my summer every summer, like various parties and galas throughout the year. And I would have to work the door. I would have to shuffle around, various guests to make sure that they got a photo on the red carpet, or like force the Page Six reporter who was there onto like whoever the client was to try to get something in. I often was assigned the task of running behind Bill Cunningham to make sure that he would like get the names of the important guests at the gala, or, whoever the client was, to make sure you got a picture of them, which was, obviously one of the thrills of the job. Is very exciting to see him in action. But I was able to just sort of focus on the job. It's sort of like a conscious autopilot. It's almost like a performance. Like, here I go, smile on my face. Like every conversation is super like chipper and yay. And in the back of my mind, I know what it is that I have to get done, and I'm getting it done. And I can't sort of let any natural shyness or ego or anything get in the way of getting that job done. And it helps when reporting, because it's the same sort of like, I can't be nervous about this because I have to do my job. So it doesn't matter if you're a huge celebrity. It doesn't matter if I'm going up to a stranger on the street and I otherwise would be so embarrassed. The adrenaline sort of washes all of that away. So that has served me well.
Oh, I love the way you described that. I just felt like I was in that room seeing you dart around. And I know that feeling too. And it's like that, I mean, that fake it till you make it thing is real. When I worked at Cosmo, I had a boss, Joanna Coles, and I feel like she was so good at forcing us into situations that she thought we were ready for and could handle, but we didn't know ourselves.
Yeah.
And there was an element of enjoying the like sink or swim moment. And if you impressed her and managed, there'd be like, okay, next, moving on, to the next.
Right. A little mental note there.
Yes, like clocked that. So then the next job after grad school, what was that?
I was an editorial assistant at GQ.
Great.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. It's funny, when I first got it and I, was like single and on OkCupid, I remember a friend saying like, oh, that is just going to be the best opening line. Like, how cool does that sound? It's like, okay, well, I'm hoping to get a little bit more out of it, but I'll take that too.
That's so funny. I can talk a little bit about these different voices that publications have and then kind of where yours is in the middle of it all.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a great place to start because you could be voicey at GQ, and that was what you were being, if you were editing, what you were editing for. I was an editorial assistant under who was then the culture editor, and that was sort of like the area of, coverage or the sort of beat that I thought I would be interested in. So it felt like a perfect sort of boot camp into what I would eventually end up doing. And that meant watching a ton of screeners of things, looking through a book if it was assigned to me for a small item in the culture pages. The grunt work wasn't too bad. It was like doing expenses and booking travel for the editors, writers who were on assignment somewhere. But it was a place where I sort of like learned what cultural reporting meant and what went into it, and sort of like maybe sharpened my eye towards what made something worth covering and thinking of ways to cover it that aren't so straightforward. The culture pages then were sort of like a package with various points of entry every month. And so you might have like a 5-second Q&A and then a long book review and a little humor item of some sort. Like, it was a lot of content in very small space in a couple pages of the front of book. So it also taught me how to think that way, how to sort of like package ideas and think about sort of like quirky ways to cover culture at various lengths that doesn't all have to be a review or a recap or a straightforward interview. You wanted to have a point of view and you wanted it to be sharp. You could be a little bit meaner at GQ than I could be at other places I worked after, but knowing how to sort of like take it there, and then it's always easy to scale down a voice than it is to scale it up. And so I was lucky to learn from a place in the beginning where the voice was pretty scaled up and the point of view was sort of maybe brash in a refined way.
I like that. You can tell we have an editor on our hands, everyone.
This episode is brought to you by Smart Food, the sweet, salty snack you need this holiday season. Air Pop Popcorn, tossed in delicious white cheddar cheese, or mixed with sweet caramel and cheddar. It's the perfect snack for your smart holiday party. Shop now at snacks.com.
So what you said is interesting about learning how, what culture reporting is, but also what the culture is. And I kind of want to bring us to the moment we're in, which feels overwhelming and at the cut, what happened when the abortion ban news came on. And obviously that wasn't a shock.
Right.
But how you report for women and people of any gender who it affects in different states. Like, you're covering nationally, internationally.
Right.
I know in Australia there's a huge readership. How do you what were the type of conversations in that like writer's room in quotes or, editorial meetings about how do we cover this responsibly?
Sure. So when the opinion was leaked, gosh, now I forget what we were on. I think we were doing live coverage of the Met Gala. I know it was a red carpet event and we were on late. So we happened to all still be online and on Slack together when the draft was leaked because it was after, work hours. And it was one of those things where it's coming, but until you see it and you see the words that are deciding the fate of people and harshly and unforgivingly and unjustly, you don't expect to feel the way you do. And I think it really took everyone a beat to go through the feelings personally and then sort of pivot to that next morning of like, okay, all systems go. What are we going to do? At the time, we were already working on what became the cover story of an issue in May that was, this magazine could get you an abortion or help you get an abortion. It was a big package that we had underway that the conversations had started for a few months prior. I remember when I first joined the team at a print pitch meeting, I had floated the idea of, and this was like many months before, we should do something that's just like, assumes that we are going to lose Roe. Like it feels like everyone knows that's what's happening. So let's stop like talking about that and do some sort of service piece. Like, how do you have an abortion at home? Like what does a self-managed abortion look like? What are ways to access that kind of care if it's illegal to, and, et cetera. And we'd talked about the idea and hadn't really put sort of structure around it. And then very soon after our power editor, Katie Thompson, joined, she had a similar idea that was more fleshed out. And she's like, what if we do a interactive service guide, a map that has everything you could possibly need? And from there, we further developed the idea. We had many meetings with the product team at New York who were very patient with us and also pulled off a miracle. We were really working on that finder tool up until the last minute before the issue came out. So the planning and the reporting for that was really already underway. And we also, were editing and assigning out the pieces that ran alongside that guide. In print, it was a sort of like phone book looking guide that had everything you needed to know about all of the abortion clinics in every state and what the laws are in every state, and sort of like an everything guide to abortion care in the United States right now. And online, it is a live, ever updating tool where you type in your zip code or your state, if you're a minor, and how many weeks along you are, and it will give you what your options are in your state and what your options are in the closest state where you can actually access care if your state completely bans abortion. And there are also telemedicine options on there. So when the decision came out, the question was, should we rush this? Like, how soon can we do this? And we were only a few weeks out. I'd have to look at the calendar, but we weren't too far behind when the issue actually came out. Luckily, for the sake of myself and the other editors, the product team was like, absolutely not. Like, this is not ready. We cannot roll this out until the date that we plan to roll it out, which gave us a little bit of a breather. And the magazine,
do it responsibly.
Right, yeah. Right. For sure. And the magazine still had, it's New York Magazine. So we have the best writers sort of at our fingertips, and they were still able to put out an issue in between the leak and our abortion issue that still addressed the fall of Roe and what it all meant and what the moment felt like. So yeah, that was the conversation. It was sort of like, oh God, I can't believe it's happening, even though we've literally been planning an issue around this, knowing it's going to happen. And is it worth trying to rush this out? or sticking to our plan and figuring out other coverage that we can do up in the moment, which we did. And the cut did a ton of stuff around it, around, the feeling that everyone was feeling, the reactions that people were having, and what this all meant and what it was going to look like when this was no longer a leaked draft and this was going to be the law of the land. To answer your question about how we cover this for such a broad audience, I mean, I think it's something we just are figuring out kind of every day. There is so much to cover, and it's figuring out what stories aren't being told that we can tell well and that we have the access to, or we have the idea around, how can we tell this story in a way that is both informative but isn't repetitive and hasn't been told elsewhere and can be helpful, or just shine a light on an experience that maybe we haven't told before or we think needs more shine. And it can be really overwhelming because we could just do abortion stories and we still wouldn't do every story that's out there or every injustice that's happening.
Well, and how do you balance that? I want to know what is resonating with readers right now. Look, I remember as an editor, you would had these stories that you felt were so important and that, would really, I remember writing pieces about the Affordable Care Act. I mean, like, what 25-year-old wants to read about, how they can finally get health insurance. Or like 27, I guess, if you're after your, parents' cover. We're like, how do we do that? But you'd write these pieces in hope that it would provide information for people that really needed it. And then I added the astrology pages, and the info would come back and it would be like, most popular page, and I was like, yes, it's a page that everyone reads every month or every, but
I also edited the astrology pages at Cosmo.
Oh my gosh. I don't know about you, but we had a really fabulous astrologer. I don't know if it was still Aurora Tower, but, there was a moment where, she emailed and she was like, well, the copy looks a little different in the magazine than what I sent in. And I would edit it, sometimes a lot, which I enjoyed. But also I wanted to make it, relevant to the reader. But as a side note, maybe some Hollywood people are listening. I thought it would be a great movie. Oh my gosh, we could co-write it about an editor who, has all those serious stories they want to tell at the magazine and they're assigned editing the astrology page.
Funny.
And whenever she really heavily edits the astrology pages, very much so. And I thought in real time, we'd see how it'd follow 4 readers and they would follow their sign's instructions so much. And the editor's words would change their lives.
This has rom-com.
This is a good premise.
Written all over
we
it.
We are developing this in real time.
Yes, it's very, it's like astrology means how to lose a guy in 10 days.
Exactly. Okay, that's the pitch. But I'm like, now I've totally lost my train of thought because I'm working on our production deal in my head. So leaving that aside, what stories are resonating with your readers right now, from, those serious topics to the kinds of articles that we all click on because it's like a relief read?
Right. Well, I think for those sort of serious moments and for things like, writing about abortion, it's the stories that help readers process, I think. And it's whether you're processing it emotionally, afterwards. I think it was after the leak, we did what we call a cut chat. And we, get a bunch of people on the staff in the same Slack channel and we talk through how we're feeling about something. Or we did one for Don't Worry, Darling. So that one was really just
oh, wow,
us just shouting questions at each other. Yeah. So I think it's the stories where, it's less the here's what happened, but let's go a little deeper. So here's what happened, but here's how that fits into the context that we're in, or here's how that will impact you, and here's what you need to understand about it, or what you need to understand about what the impact is on other people. I think it's really guiding the reader through these big historical moments or just big news moments, and unpacking kind of what it all means. And I think that does that very sort of like pointed point of view, a human is writing this with feelings sort of approach, and that voice that we have is what makes readers want to read those stories. And yes, it can be very hard to both cover serious topics in a way that, a mass audience wants to read, but also just in like a very crowded space. You can get your news from a lot of places, and we all have breaking news alerts on our phones from CNN, from the Times. So we're competing with that kind of here's what just happened news reporting. And so we need to take it a step further, and it's here's what happened, and here's why you should care, or how you can sort of process this news. And it's also showing the like human effects of news, right? So it's talking to, right, as part of that abortion package, we talked to a group of women about what it was like to get an abortion, in that last few weeks, in those last few months, that sort of like right now, this is what it's like. And to get at the idea that it was already really hard for a lot of people to access this what should be very basic and universal care. In terms of what, our readers are reading, like they can't get enough of that Meghan Markle cover.
I bet. And also, like, are the Kardashians just still a thing?
I suppose
the
they
sigh,
are.
The sigh. I'm like relieved to hear the sigh, because I'm like, are we still caring? But I feel like sometimes media is making us care. And I'm like, do people actually want this? Or is it something like some self-fulfilling loop?
Right. Gosh, I don't know. Some combination of all of the above, maybe. I think our approach in terms of covering a celebrity like that is to, sort of only cover a news item when we feel strongly about it, or it's just, we know that it's topic of conversation. We don't have to feel strongly about it. Like, this really matters that Kim has a skincare line, more so that like, well, we know this is going to be in the reader's life and they're going to be curious about it. So,
we should cover this.
Right. So what do we have to say about it that is going to be helpful or entertaining to the reader? So sometimes that does include Kardashian updates. When she was, in Staten Island, that was very exciting for all New Yorkers and readers. But, I think sometimes it's not just the quick celebrity news hits, but the sort of like stepping back and looking at a big pop culture moment that's happening and sort of like digging in a little deeper and thinking about the whys of it. Like, for Don't Worry, Darling, we had a piece go up about the Stepford Wives trope and why are we, still doing it and still care about this idea.
That feels so retro.
Yeah. And same with the Marilyn Monroe movie, Blonde. We had a piece that was just like, let her rest. Like, leave this woman alone. Why is this still a thing? And then we had a piece go up that was sort of like, unpacking the editor called it the deadly glamour of the movie, and that, in order to interrogate this figure, and I say figure because we're not really interrogating the real Norma Jean behind the Marilyn Monroe, that the portrayal has to be so brutal and glamorous at the same time. So I feel like those are the things I think that readers expect from us, that sort of like a take on something.
Or to hold Hollywood to account, I think. So books coverage obviously is under your purview. So I would love to know if you've read anything recently that is just, that you've loved and would like tell your best friends about, and then anything coming up that you're excited about.
Yeah, I'm reading at the moment Alive at the End of the World, the new poetry book from Saeed Jones. Oh. And I can't tell you the last time I read a poetry book. I like poetry, but it was never something that I would think to pick up a new book of poems and read through the way I would fiction. And I am just such a huge fan of his writing, and his poems are, I don't know, they just, maybe because I already know his voice and, read his Substack and I'm such a fan, but I think also just the voice in them and the imagery and the way that thoughts are strung together in those poems just like sort of call out to me, and they're both like a joy to read. Like you can kind of breeze through them, but at the same time, they also are kind of a slap in the face. Like they make you kind of like sit up a little straight in your chair and really think about what it was that you just read, but in a good way. So I'm reading that at the moment. I read This Time Tomorrow a little while ago from Emma Straub, which I just loved and loved her writing. And, it was one of those books where when you finally get to the end, you just lay it on your chest and cry for a little bit. Yeah, and I'm excited for actually a cookbook that is coming out. Yes. I think in January, and it's, I believe, like cookbook / collection of essays, and it's from this writer Bre Graham, who has a newsletter which I read every Sunday, and her writing is just very kind of cozy. There's always a little moment of her writing through, what's happened that week or where she's traveled or any complicated feelings she's feeling. And then there's a little bit of like a recipe that she's made herself that week, ideas for what you can cook during the week, but it's sort of tying the food writing and the essay writing together. And so I'm excited to see what that looks like kind of in longer form. So that'll be good. And what else? I have not picked up my copy, but intend to very soon, of Bobby Finger's new book. I am a big Who Weekly fan and a general fan of his work and his writing, and excited to see what his fiction looks like.
Oh, and you just mentioned one of my obsessions, kind of cooking and everything food related. Yeah. I wondered if you have a secret obsession that you can share with us.
A secret obsession that's food related?
No, it could be anything, like an interest.
Oh, I'll give you a food related one because it came to mind since it followed that question. Okay, general secret obsession is watching like cooking videos on YouTube, which I think like a lot of people do, so it's not really that secret, but there are like particular channels that my partner Ian and I are like very big fans of and watch as though it's like appointment television. Like when there is a new recipe drop, it's like, okay, don't watch this without me. Like, when are we going to watch this together on the TV? There are a few. So Gaz Oakley, they're all vegan because my partner is vegan. I like to say I'm vegan friendly. But Gaz Oakley is a chef from Wales who has a very popular YouTube channel and a couple of cookbooks. And he is, in addition to being very handsome, very good at really changing your mind on what vegan food could be. And I've made a bunch of his recipes and we watch his videos all the time. And it's so funny because it's one of those things where if he walked in the room right now, it would be like Beyonce walking in the room. Like he is just like a celebrity to me and so exciting.
Maybe he needs a profile.
I mean, he really does.
Okay, my last question. Yes. What lights you up? Maybe you just answered it.
Yeah. Gaz Oakley, no. What lights me up? Would it be sort of cheesy to say, like my dogs, cooking? No. Like I love a really early morning on the weekends, like when you feel you get that sort of like quiet time of the day just to yourself to do, whatever. Maybe it's just lying in bed reading the newsletters you missed throughout the week or getting up and making coffee. It's just the world feels so quiet really early in the morning on a Saturday or a Sunday. And yeah, and my like 2 beautiful, stupid dogs. And I say stupid with all the love in my heart. You can't teach them any tricks. They bark at everyone. They're very misbehaved, but they're adorable.
Jen, thank you. That's beautiful. I am going to kind of think of you on my early Saturday morning at that moment. And I'm in the market for some dogs.
Oh, well. Well, if I can give a plug to Wise Animal Rescues, where we got our second dog, Patty, and they are great. And just always, I mean, you could see how you could quickly slip into how that could be your secret obsession. You just have tons of dogs. Every time they post a new rescue dog, we're like, is 3 too many? Could we? Maybe. We can't.
I don't know if in a New York
No, absolutely not. We can barely do 2.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing so much. I hope you'll be a regular.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And
everyone, I think Jen's a natural. I think you should
I don't know.
go on the Cuts podcast. You're absolutely brilliant. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. This was really fun.
Lit Up is a podcast from Sugar 23. It's hosted by me, Angela Ledgewood, and is produced by Liam Billingham. Olivia Allmeyer is the marketing and editorial consultant. This week's episode was edited by Rebecca Seidel. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Andrei Radovsky wrote the theme music. See you in 2 weeks.